everyone, welcome to Conversations with Vander. My name is Vander Mudisa, and today I'm joined by a very good friend and a leader within our African society. I'm so excited to be talking all things diamond and the downside of what is called the Kimberley process and setting the narrative straight. So, Mr. V, that's how I commonly call you, of course. But for those who don't know you, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us the organization you're from and what it is that we're talking about today? Yeah.
Great start. I'm Conrad Van der Ross. I'm the operations manager of State Diamond Trader, state-owned entity in South Africa, reporting to the Department of Minerals and Resources. So, as part of Department of Mineral Resources, we then represent our country at the Kimberley Process. And I think that's what we're going to touch base on, is the Kimberley Process. The fact that last week we had our plenary take place at Vic Falls under the chairmanship of Zimbabwe. And I think that's what we're going to discuss today.
Absolutely. But before we get into all of that, I'm from Botswana, diamond producing country. You're from South Africa. So I guess what connects us beyond our Africanicity is the diamonds.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about the Kimberley process, what is it by definition and how did it come about?
The Kimberley process was established in 2003. And it came about, if you do recall, the infamous movie, The Blood Diamonds. And it was about consumer confidence. Consumers wanted to buy a product that they know that didn't impact and didn't contribute towards conflict. And countries then came together to discuss this under the United Nations, to actually discuss of organizing this multinational organization that will then monitor the flow of diamonds through a certification scheme. And that's where Kimberley process came about. The name Kimberley, of course, it was the whole setup was done in a small little town in the Northern Cape in South Africa called Kimberley, where diamonds were originally discovered. And the name was taken from there. So you've got quite a few countries that have signed up. It's a voluntary system where people sign up to. Currently, there's about 85 countries that are members of Kimberley process. And with our plenary that we had last week, we had about 238 participants representing those 85 countries.
Right. And when you look at it in that sense, so prior to the Kimberley process, there was nothing that could legitimize trade, diamonds, and so on.
Absolutely. There was no system in place. So you could import, export in whichever form you wanted to. With the whole issue around conflict, especially within Africa, and we always say Kimberley process is Africa. If you look at the definition of conflict diamonds, it talks about the rebel movements. I mean, we do not hear that term in the Western countries at all. But there was no scheme that legitimized diamonds. And of course, Botswana being a producer, South Africa being a producer, we depend on consumer confidence. Yes. So that's where that system came into play. So any diamond that is exported amongst member states has to be accompanied by a Kimberley process certificate that basically says these diamonds are sourced in conflict-free areas.
Right. So in that sense, you mentioned earlier how the UN is involved and obviously how the Kimberley process is involved. So where would you say the limitations or the scope in which the Kimberley process applies, and then where you say, okay, this is our limitation, this is where the UN gets involved?
Absolutely. I think when we're talking about conflict, and I think this must probably be some of our colleagues within KP gets it wrong. United Nations are the peacekeepers. And if we are established in terms of the United Nations, the Kimberley process mandate is to stem the flow of conflict diamonds. So that definition that we have got around conflict diamonds is applied. If you are unable to then export your diamonds with that certification scheme, nobody will purchase from it. And since the establishment of the Kimberley process, conflict diamonds, or blood diamonds as it is known, has declined by less than 1%.
Sure.
So it had an impact. in the last 20 years. So the mandate of Kimberley Process is the flow of diamonds. It can never take over the role of the United Nations when we talk about peace and stopping conflict. We stem the flow, which means that we stem then the financing of conflict. And that's its mandate.
Now let's touch on that with the financing of conflict and so on. Just looking at the historical aspect of it, and I'm sure maybe typically at this podcast we talk about Korea and so on, but we have the Natural Diamond Summit this week in Botswana. We have so much going on, and you realize that there's not a lot of education that's been going about. And even when it comes to the Kimberley process, how effective it's been in terms of what it looks like when we say financing conflict. Can you maybe just really just take us back from the historical aspect of how diamonds have, in essence, been financing some sort of conflict and some sort of injustices and, I guess, slavery in essence, and why us as Africans need to be concerned?
Absolutely. I think when we look at the nucleus of where it all started, rebel movements needed money, so most of them would then be mining diamonds as well, and of course use child labor to mine those diamonds in order to get the money to get arms. And it's that linkage that we want to break. We want to break that because it's got a whole moral justice type of feel to it. And the country's people deserve to derive benefit from its natural resources and not to be used for conflict at all. So it's breaking that link. Rebel movements, governments that are actually mining and selling that rough diamonds to get financing to buy arms. It's breaking that linkage. That's very important.
So, as with any, I guess, considerably just cause, there are criticisms faced as well. And I'm going to be completely objective here. What are the clear criticisms that the KP has faced? And I guess obviously looking at how it's a multi-stakeholder, the number of countries as well. It's from African to the West and so on. But what are the clear criticisms that the KP has faced? And also when you also observe it, you're like, actually, we need to fix this and this, and these are flaws.
I think the one recently, for the last 2 years, when Botswana was the chair of KPS as well, that's where it reared its ugly head. And it went apart with the Russian-Ukraine conflict.
Yes.
And you had your Western Bloc that wanted that to be part of the agenda. And they persisted on having that part of the agenda, where the opposing side felt, but it's not the mandate of Kimberley Process. It's not our mandate. And even if you look at what the definition says, it talks about rebel movements. So it falls outside of that. And this is where and we call our brothers and sisters within KP, where they feel short. I think the politicizing of Kimberley Process becomes a huge problem. Recently as well, in Zimbabwe, we had the same issue again, where the Western Bloc raised the issue around Russia-Ukraine war and wanted it as part of the agenda. Now, we find that a bit dishonest in the sense that that communication came a week before plenary, number one. And we're talking facts. The second one is a month ago, there was a face-to-face meeting in Luanda to discuss the agenda. And then it boggles one's mind to think, but wait a minute, wouldn't that have been the opportune moment to bring up this?
When the agenda was being discussed.
Absolutely. So one can't just come to the conclusion that it's deliberate. There is a sense that one gets that there's an active process taking place in attempt to destabilize Kimberley Process. I'm saying that if you link it all to, I'm sure you have heard about the G7 that want to impose sanctions on Russian goods, but create a similar process as the Kimberley Process, a parallel process. Now that concerns us because Kimberley Process is recognized by the UN.
Mm.
It concerns us that if the West does not get its way within a legitimate process like the Kimberley process, they can easily just create another one, a new parallel process. The unintended consequences of that for Botswana, for South Africa, for Angola, for DRC could be quite costly if this actually goes ahead. So we're also part of the African Diamond Producers Association that has got 19 diamond producing countries, represent about 60% of the world's production. They have come out and actually rejected the G7 because number one, it's unilateral. There has been no engagements, and so when you talk about the challenges of KP, that's the one, the politicizing. Now KP is a tripartite. You got diamond producing countries, and then you have got the World Diamond Council as part of it as well, and then you've got the coalition of civil society. I read an article that civil society said that they walked out of the plenary meeting because there wasn't a consensus of whether to have Ukraine-Russia as an agenda item. That's false.
Sure.
I'm not understanding this narrative that is being created. If all of this is being said, how come we had 99 items to discuss within that week? 98 of them has been agreed upon through consensus, meaning everybody agreed to it. I mean, if that is not success, I do not know. If you talk about 85 countries.
So there's a sense of falsehood now that's being represented.
Absolutely.
So examining the narrative now, is there a, and I'm saying is because, but really it seems that there is, but I would love for you to elaborate on it. Is there a clear divide between the Western Bloc and participating African countries when it comes to KP policies now, and what the agendas that, I mean, not even just the agendas, but what's being represented and presented rather to the public?
I think the clear divide is on the basis of politicizing KP. KP has worked for the last 20 years. We do not agree with politicizing. We do believe that there are international bodies to deal with certain things. KP has got its mandate. So when we're talking about the work of KP, we are working quite well together. It's just this one item, the Russian-Ukraine war. What was interesting as well is when the civil society made its opening remarks at the beginning of the plenary, they mentioned Russia-Ukraine conflict. They didn't mention, and they just mentioned other conflicts. Now you and I know there's one huge one currently taking place, the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that is also a bit concerning for us, but you are focusing on one. What about all of these other conflicts happening? And that's why South Africa has taken the stance quite strong and to remind everybody that all lives matter. We cannot be selective in this. But the clear division is just on the basis of the attempts to politicize Kimberley Process. That's the clear division. But on the other policies and working, we are working quite well on it.
Then why does it seem as though that one portion is the reason why it's considered a fail all of a sudden?
This is what is boggling us as well. I mean, I've just told you that we have taken 98 decisions out of 99. And it is being portrayed as if Kimberley Process is not working well. If we want to perpetuate a certain narrative, and the mandate of Kimberley Process does not follow that narrative, then I am going to start telling the story that Kimberley Process is failing because it is not feeding into my narrative. But that's not the objective of the Kimberley Process. So that is the biggest challenge that we have got. I think this will most probably continue. It'll be interesting to see if we do decide UAE will be the chair next year. So if we do decide to have a discussion around conflict, and here we say global conflict, we do not just want to talk about one specific conflict. Because we are choosing sides. No. If we are serious about this whole issue around conflict, then let's talk about all conflict.
It's not a selective
Absolutely.
thing, yes. And there's within, I'm not really sure it's within or it's a leg of the Kimberley process, the African initiative. Could you tell us about that?
No, the African initiative is just around the fact of it, Africa basically reminding the world that it is and has got a voice. And to your point, exactly with the G7, carrying on unilaterally to implement something without consulting Africa. Africa contributes about 60-70% of the world's production of diamonds, and we are not consulted. So it is about getting Africa's voice out there. It is about decisions that's important to Africa as a whole, to the benefit of its people, because we know that diamonds do good. I mean, you guys will know much better within Botswana the impact that diamonds can do. And it's that narrative that we also want to get out there. And the importance of getting that narrative out is the onslaught of lab-grown diamonds that we are having. So we've got to protect our industry. Why? Because many people benefit from it. So we have to speak out as Africa. And I think Africa has been doing that quite well in the last couple of years. Been very vocal and really made their voices heard because it's to the benefit of its people.
And then when we look at the geopolitical dynamics and implications of being anti the KP process, is that something you're able to maybe touch on? Just looking at it, because if we're going for a system that's unilateral, that means that no voices are heard, and really the African initiative will take us back to historical times that we'll be talking about blood diamonds, but the modern version of it.
Absolutely, and this is our biggest fear is the fact that 7 countries can decide what happens. Today it can be Russian goods. Tomorrow they can decide they've got an issue with South Africa. So the South African goods cannot be imported into any of the G7 countries. Imagine the impact that it has on that countries. And this is where the crux of the matter is, where we really got an issue. It is this unilateral application without recognizing the implications it can have. I think we are moving into this whole space of geopolitical. And if you take a neutral position like South Africa did within the Russia-Ukraine, it took a neutral one. And even that was wrong. When a country calls for peace and calls for ceasefire and calls for conversation to happen, it can't be that you take a neutral position and because you're not siding with anyone, it becomes a big issue. And I think Africa has taken that stance and said, well, we're not taking sides. We do believe in a conversation that needs to be held and peace talks held. And we're quite adamant about the fact as well is that you can't feed into conflict.
Can you elaborate on that?
When I'm saying you can't feed into conflict, the one thing that comes out quite a lot, especially now that we're in our review cycle of KP, and we will be looking at the definition of conflict, diamonds. And one thing that has come out is that Africa does not produce arms. We don't produce arms. Where are these arms coming from? Number one. And then you're talking about, we cannot say that we want to assist a whole peace type of process, but we are supplying the one side with ammunition and all of this type of thing. So we are quite stern on this. We say, neutrality means a conversation. It doesn't mean that we perpetuate the problem and then come back and want to blame the rest of the world for not standing up.
Yeah. I think also it's interesting because you're calling for advocacy for our own minerals as well, in comparison to, okay, if the Western world is saying this, then we follow suit because maybe they are huge finances in our communities, but it's our very diamonds that are helping diversify our economies and so on.
Correct. Yeah. We have to own our own narrative. We have to tell our own story. I think for too long we have allowed it to be told by others. Others have capitalized. Look, USA and EU is more of a consumer market. USA being the biggest diamond jewelry market. So they have been telling Africa's narrative. and have been capitalizing on it. It is time that we take ownership of it. It's time that we tell our stories. You know, when we're talking about provenance, is a very important thing, and Botswana can actually claim that as well in its whole pipeline about where the rough diamonds are mined, who has manufactured it.
The process of it
that
all
whole
before it gets to
process.
the end user.
Absolutely. And who touched it? Because if you're looking at that, telling that narrative, the consumer will appreciate more the product because now you're putting a face to it. You're putting a community that has benefited from it. You know, so Africa has to speak about its narrative. It has to own it. We can't allow others to keep on telling our story. And imagine, if somebody else must tell your story, what version are they going to be telling? And that's where we have to own it. Within ADPA, we will be talking about really looking at marketing aspect. Marketing the good that diamonds have done, rough diamonds have done, to Africa as a whole continent. To change this narrative, because I think people's got in this narrative as well, about young people working in the gold and diamond fields. They forget, that Africans are actually ones that wear suits, that are in boardrooms. We're not just laborers.
Yeah.
We set the tone now.
It's so disappointing though, because you wouldn't think that 2023 leading to 2024, this is the discussion that's still being had. There's still that colonialism mindset that's seen within boardrooms and within policymakers as well. But I mean, if you're to simplify it now, what narrative are you committing yourself and maybe others within the African climate? What narrative are you setting on to set regarding the Kimberley process? Because when I just Googled it, the first thing I saw is backlash and it's just anti, they don't use the modern technology yet. Certification can be mishandled, and are we really sure that this is where the diamonds came from? So there's just so many things that are going around in my mind.
I think the one thing with the Kimberley process is that we've got quite a few working groups under it. We have got the working group of diamond experts that looks into digitalization of the Kimberley process, number one. Number two, there's also the fingerprinting of diamonds. So you've got a subgroup on scientific, and you have got a range of scientists that sit around that. And the whole idea with that is to see if we can fingerprint the diamonds to know exactly where it comes from. So there is work taking place. The digitalization is currently taking place. If you look at India, majority of what they do is technology. And it's that type of technology that we're also looking at emulating in other African countries, but you'll also appreciate the challenges. Yeah. If you go further north, we do realize there are some challenges. So Kimberley process is also about assisting. So it's defining what assistance participants require. Remember, it's a voluntary. You volunteer to be subjected to your systems being scrutinized in order to for you to qualify to meet the minimum requirements. So part of that is, or in the subgroups, digitalization that we're all looking at. There are countries already doing that. It is now bringing it to the broader KP family. When we're talking about certifications, the certificates itself, the concerns raised there, we have got a body that actually looks at any certificates that is fraudulent. And we are able to trace that because you have got now a situation of 85 countries that are talking to one another. I don't think you've got any other system like that that actually talk to one another and follow the process of when goods are imported, exported. So the narrative that you're talking about in the press, it is negative because it suits certain few. If you talk to the rest of the Kimberley process participants, they will give you another narrative. They will tell you the good that KP has done in the countries.
Yes.
We also adopted the Framework 7 that going to look at labor laws, human rights, anti-corruption, all of those elements, and then develop a framework for which all members will then sign up to. So KP is working. It might not be working in a certain way for certain people, but it is having a huge impact.
Yeah.
We have got an organization that is based on consensus decisions, come up with 98 consensus decisions made. So we are getting there.
Yeah. And then what are we looking forward to in this coming year in terms of the KP, regardless of obviously the criticisms? But
Yeah.
I'm sure you're still, I've noticed this from the inception till date, there's just been so much progress, and now like into digitization and marketing and setting the narrative like we've been talking about, and educating, of course, our very own people about the Kimberley process. And also I'm learning this beautiful appreciation now that I have for it, and saying, okay, no, we are protected in essence. And it really is something to see our own leaders stand up to those who kind of considered high and mighty, and I guess in essence used to own us.
Absolutely. Look, I think what we're looking forward to is we are in our review cycle. The ad hoc committee on review and reform is currently chaired by Angola. South Africa is the vice chair of it, where we will review all aspects of KP. Like I spoke to you about the definition, because we know that conflict evolves. And that's why it becomes necessary to review the definition of conflict. Because we're also saying that it just can't be about producing countries. What about trading centers? Those that import, export. It can't just, and those that manufacture. It can't just be the responsibility of the producing countries. So that's the type of things that we are looking at. We're looking at strengthening the core document of the Kimberley process. Strengthening its decision framework. So there's quite a lot. There's a technical committee that will look at technical assistance and community development. We are looking at that. We will be having a session with the community to understand, number one, how conflict has impacted them. Number two, what do they need from diamonds as such? How do diamonds impact them? Where they are mined. So we want to hear evidence from the community. So we don't want to sit over there and come up with something. We want the community to actually tell us. And we'll be able to take that has been said and craft a framework to assist communities where diamonds are being mined. But we're also taking that responsibility further than just the producers again, because we are challenging our trading for participants and our manufacturing participants to identify which community are you serving. How does the sale of a diamond ring benefit a community? If you're unable to answer that, then you can't just put the sole responsibility on producing countries. But we are looking at all of these aspects. So it's quite an exciting year ahead, with a whole review taking place, where we're looking at all of these aspects. Definition of conflict diamonds is always an emotive conversation. And hence what we're doing is we're first having panel discussions to understand the different conflicts out there, the communities, discussions, so that we can bring all of this together in addressing the ever-changing definition of conflict. So it has to be step by step. Imagine if 85 countries had to talk about conflict. Everybody will be talking about their side of it. So we are trying to move away from that and getting the experts involved to tell us about this conflict and these mechanisms of financing. I think the one thing is as well is that we don't want to create a situation where a definition is used to punish a country. There has to be steps in place. There has to be steps in place that you are able to say, okay, fine, that is there, so hence. It has to be clear on that. There's a lot going to take place next year. We are excited with the UAE taking over the chairmanship. discussions around who will be the vice chair is a sticky one as well. Belarus applied, not supported by the West because they feel it's a proxy. And we're saying in terms of the rules.
Yes. Going back to the fine print.
Just the rules. We always maintain that Kimberley Process decisions are based on rules. And that's why you have got rules. So I can bring my personal things in there. You know, as a country, so Africans say, oh, no, fine. You know, but Botswana, we got issue with you. So we will use this mechanism to... It can't be that. And hence we're saying no politicizing of the Kimberley Process. It has worked for the last 20 years. In the last 2 years, what has changed? To make this narrative that it is not working. And I think the public and everybody out there should be asking themselves those questions.
Sure.
You know, they should be asking themselves those questions, even as well for the last 20 years. What happened in the last 2 years? That all of a sudden this negative press is around it. To whose benefit? The one thing that was emphasized at the plenary at Big Falls is a comment made by one of the participants: we will fight for KP. And there is this unity around it. You should have been there. You haven't seen the African states speak with one voice.
Wow.
That they will fight for KP.
Yeah. And I guess in essence, in fighting for KP, it's fighting for our country,
Absolutely.
Fighting for our people and what we earn.
Correct.
Absolutely brilliant. I look forward to a part 2 of this. I've learned so much, and I think you really simplified it. I think just prior to this conversation, I was wondering, okay, what would the young professional, just the everyday citizen who's always complaining about government and our African leaders, oh, our minerals are just, we don't know what's happening. But now I think what you've shown us is the extent at which the KP goes and why we should all be concerned. And I guess in essence, fight for the narrator that matters.
Correct.
Absolutely. Mr. V, it's been incredible having you on this conversation, and I look forward to reading more comments. And thank you for educating us as well and really standing up. We don't want bullies here. That's all I've got to say.
No. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.